The first thing Elias Boone heard that night was not the wind. It was a woman crying. Her voice came through the blizzard like something the storm itself was trying to bury. Elias pulled his horse to a stop outside the Black Pine settlement and listened. Then he heard a child screaming, "Mama!" He turned toward the sound and saw a sight that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A young pregnant woman was sitting helplessly in the snow outside a rough wooden cabin, her pale dress soaked and covered with dirt. She was clearly in labor, barely able to remain upright. A frightened little boy clung desperately to her arm, crying as he tried to help her stand. And standing in the doorway behind them was a hard-faced woman, who looked completely unmoved by what she had done. "Get away from my house," the woman shouted. "You and that bastard child are not coming back inside." Elias's eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his snow-covered black hat. He had ridden through enough winters to know that nobody survived long in a storm like this without shelter. He dismounted immediately. "Ma'am," he called. "That woman needs help. She can find it somewhere else," the woman snapped. She was told to leave. The young mother looked toward Elias, her face filled with exhaustion and fear. "Please," she whispered. "My name is Clara Whitfield. My husband is gone. His mother threw us out." The little boy wrapped both arms around Clara. "Don't leave Mama," he cried. Elias stepped forward. "I'm not leaving anybody." The older woman slammed the door. Elias ignored her and knelt beside Clara. "Can you walk?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so." Another wave of pain forced her to close her eyes. Elias immediately removed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he looked at the boy. "What's your name, son?" "Samuel." "Samuel, you're going to stay close to your mama, understand?" The boy nodded through his tears. Elias lifted Clara carefully from the snow and carried her toward his horse. "Where are you taking her?" the woman shouted from inside the cabin. Elias turned. "Somewhere people don't throw women into the snow." He placed Clara inside his wagon and covered her with blankets. The storm had become so thick that the road back to his ranch was almost invisible, but Elias knew every bend in that country. He had spent 15 years riding those mountains. Slowly, he drove through the snow until the lights of his ranch appeared through the darkness. His ranch house was small but warm. An old housekeeper named Mrs. Harlan hurried to the door when she saw him. "Elias, what in heaven's name? We need hot water, blankets, and whatever you can prepare. She's having the baby." Mrs. Harson immediately understood. "Bring her inside." For the next several hours, Elias waited outside the bedroom while the storm battered the windows. Samuel sat beside him, holding a tin cup with both hands. The boy had stopped crying but he kept staring at the bedroom door. "Is Mama going to die?" he finally asked. Elias looked at him. "No, your mama is stronger than this storm." "How do you know?" Elias paused. "Because she made it this far." Near dawn, a baby's cry finally came from the bedroom. Samuel jumped to his feet. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, relieved. Mrs. Harlan opened the door with a tired smile. "A little girl." Samuel ran inside. Elias remained near the doorway until he heard Clara whisper, "Thank you." He stepped into the room and saw her holding the newborn against her chest. But there was something in Clara's expression that told him the story was not over. "Why did they throw you out?" Elias asked gently. Clara looked down at her daughter. "Because my husband's family believes this baby will cost them everything." Elias frowned. "What does that mean?" Clara hesitated before reaching beneath her pillow and pulling out a folded paper. Husband Daniel owned half the ranch. Before he disappeared, he told me that if anything happened to him, this deed would prove that the land belonged to our child. Elias read the paper carefully. The signature was Daniel Whitfield's. The land description was clear. But one detail caught his attention: the date. It had been signed 2 weeks after Daniel supposedly disappeared. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Clara looked frightened. "Daniel gave it to me before he left. He told me never to show it to his mother unless I had no other choice." Elias folded the paper. "Then I believe you just found the reason she wanted you out in the snow." Outside, a horse suddenly whinnied. Elias walked to the window. Through the falling snow, he saw 3 riders approaching his ranch. One carried a lantern, another wore a long black coat, and the third was holding a rifle. Elias reached for the gun hanging beside the door. Someone had followed Clara through the storm. Elias stepped onto the porch with one hand resting near his revolver. The 3 riders stopped at the edge of the yard. The man in the black coat dismounted first. "Elias Boone," he called. "Who wants to know?" "Nathan Whitfield. Daniel's younger brother." Elias studied him carefully. Nathan looked nothing like a grieving brother. His clothes were too clean, his horse too well fed, and his eyes kept drifting toward the ranch house. "What do you want?" Elias asked. Nathan pointed toward the house. "My sister-in-law, she belongs with her husband's family." Elias shook his head. "She was thrown into a snowstorm while in labor." Nathan's expression hardened. "That's family business, not anymore." One of the other men moved forward. Elias stepped off the porch. "You take another step and you'll regret it." The tension became so thick that even the horses seemed to sense it. Then a voice came from behind Elias. "Elias." Clara stood inside the doorway holding her newborn. Samuel stood beside her. "Don't let them take us." Elias didn't turn around. "They won't." Nathan laughed bitterly. "You don't know what that woman has done." Clara answered from the doorway. "I haven't done anything." Nathan pointed at her. "You know exactly what happened to Daniel." Elias looked at Clara. She lowered her eyes. Daniel was afraid of his brother. That was enough to change everything. Elias demanded the truth. Clara explained that Daniel had discovered Nathan was secretly selling pieces of the family ranch to land speculators. Daniel threatened to expose him. 2 days later, Daniel disappeared while traveling toward the county seat. His family told everyone he had abandoned Clara. But before leaving, Daniel had hidden the deed, and warned Clara that Nathan would come after her if he learned she possessed it. The older woman in the picture, the one who had thrown Clara outside, was Daniel's mother, Martha Whitfield. She had believed Nathan's story because he had convinced her that Clara was trying to steal the ranch. Elias suddenly understood why Clara had been forced into the snow. They had not wanted her dead, they had wanted her frightened enough to surrender the deed. But there was still one question. "Where is Daniel?" Elias asked. Clara shook her head. "I don't know." Nathan suddenly turned toward his horse. Elias noticed the movement. "Stop." Nathan froze. "What? You said Daniel abandoned his wife, yet you knew she had the deed. How?" Nathan said nothing. Elias walked closer. "You couldn't have known about that paper unless someone told you." Nathan's face changed. The confrontation ended when the county sheriff arrived with 2 deputies. Elias had sent word to town before the riders arrived. The sheriff searched Nathan's saddlebag and discovered letters from a land company, along with payment records and a map showing the Whitfield ranch divided into parcels. Nathan's scheme was finally exposed. But the greatest surprise came 3 days later. A rider arrived from the next county with news that Daniel Whitfield was alive. He had been injured during an ambush and taken to a distant settlement. When Daniel finally returned weeks later, he learned what his family had done. He did not return to his mother's house. Instead, he stood before Clara and apologized for leaving her without protection. Clara told him she had survived because one stranger had heard her cry in the storm. Daniel looked toward Elias and understood immediately. Months passed. Clara recovered, the baby grew stronger, and Samuel stopped waking from nightmares whenever snow began to fall. Martha eventually left the settlement, ashamed of what she had done. Nathan was arrested and forced to answer for his crimes. As for Elias, he never expected the woman he carried from the snow to become part of his life. He had only done what any decent man should have done, opened his door when another human being needed shelter. One spring morning, Clara stood on the porch of Elias's ranch holding her daughter while Samuel chased a small wooden wagon across the yard. Elias approached carrying a saddle. Clara smiled. "Do you remember what you told me that night?" she asked. "Not all of it. You said, 'You're not staying out there.'" Elias looked at her. "I meant it." Clara glanced across the valley. "That night I thought my life was ending." Elias smiled softly. "Sometimes the worst night only means you're about to find a different road." The wind moved gently through the grass where snow had once buried the ground. The cabin where Clara had been thrown out was now empty, but the ranch where a lonely cowboy had opened his door had become a home filled with laughter. And years later, whenever Samuel told the story of the night his mother was left in the snow, he never began with the storm. He always began with the sound of a horse stopping in the darkness, and a cowboy who heard a cry that everyone else had chosen to ignore. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Meaningful Impact 2.1 for more emotional old American frontier stories. And remember, sometimes changing someone's life doesn't require wealth, power, or fame. Sometimes it only requires one person to hear someone crying in the cold and refuse to walk away.